Good morning, everybody. I see that it is 10:30, so I want to start by welcoming everybody. Looks like we have a great group, and our topic this morning is to look at design thinking, which is a process, kind of a project management process, kind of an innovation process that's used a lot in different technical domains, that's used in marketing, advertising, entrepreneurship, a lot of different areas. And I have found in teaching design thinking over the years that one of the easiest ways to get a handle on it is to think about designing your life, how to apply the principles of design thinking to designing the life that you would like to lead or the lives that you would like to lead. So this morning, we're going to talk about how you can apply design thinking principles to designing your life as a way of really thinking about bringing intentionality to your life, but also as a way to get your head around design thinking and what it's all about. So to give some context, design thinking was created by the IDEO Group, David Kelly at the IDEO Group, a design and product development group out in California, a couple of decades ago, and became the foundational principles in the highly innovative Stanford School of Design. So this morning, I am going to be talking about principles that come from IDEO and from the Stanford D School, and in particular, a book that I use in class when I teach design thinking called Cleverly, Designing Your Life by Bill Burnett and Dave Evans. So we're going to be referencing that. And in those models, design thinking is defined as a culture of mindsets and methods. Can be used in a lot of different ways, but it is about reframing. It's about being curious, about mindfulness of your process, radical collaboration, and having a bias towards action. So we'll talk about more of those things as we go through, but you will often hear from folks who are not real supporters of design thinking that it's kind of frou-frou, and it's really not at all. In fact, it is more of a set of mindsets and processes than any particular one thing, so it can be used really widely. So one of the things that you most often see design thinking used for is solving really difficult problems. How do you solve water scarcity in Africa? How do you put a man on the moon or develop a process to get man to Mars? Design thinking can be used to solve those really wicked problems, often called really wicked problems, when there's no obvious answer. Life, right? There is no one right answer to how we live our lives. It's a really difficult thing to figure out how to live our best lives or how to live our best life. And so design thinking can be really useful for figuring out the path that we want to go down as human beings. And typically in the design process, I'm not going to say a lot about it this morning, but I am going to make available to you a slide deck that walks you right through the design thinking steps. And I'm going to share in a little bit the information for Kelly's book and for Evans and Burnett's book. So if you're interested at all in the things you hear about this morning, I encourage you to pick those books up and check them out. You can actually go through the whole book through videos online and other materials that's really available. So check it out. But design thinking typically starts with empathy, with when you're applying it to a product or to yourself, understanding a problem, defining a problem, and then understanding the group for whom you would be solving the problem for, and then ideating, coming up with ideas. In design thinking, you talk about divergent and convergent thinking. And divergent thinking is you want to have as many good ideas on the table as possible, right? Because that's going to help you find a solution that works. And then you converge them, you narrow them down, and you come up with an idea that's really applicable. That's the ideation phase. Once you go through that phase, then you build some sort of a model, something that will allow you to get feedback, to test your idea that you've settled on and see if it really works. If you're designing your life, you can do some small examples of that, and we'll talk more about that later. But you develop a prototype, then you test it, you get feedback, and then you start the whole loop again with empathy, definition, ideation, prototyping, and testing. So one of the principles of design thinking is that you never reach the end, that all products, all services, your life is a constant cycle of creation where you get feedback from users, from those who are using the solution, whether it's a product or service or your life, and you're constantly making refinements. So it's an iterative cyclical process, design thinking. So this is the reference for the book that I talked about, and Burnett and Evans' website, where they have a lot of information they make freely available for you. It'll be in this deck when you get it, but highly encourage you to check it out if you are interested in learning more. I want to talk this morning for just a little bit about why would you want to apply design thinking to living your life. And the short answer, which Burnett and Evans talked about as well, is that because people get stuck in trying to make choices about how to live their life or about the choices they're making in their life, and they don't know how to get unstuck. And a lot of that is because we have, as human beings, a bunch of counterproductive beliefs. They're default beliefs about our lives and about ourselves that get us stuck, and that's really difficult to get out of. So I want to talk about 3 of those dysfunctional beliefs that design thinking can help us break free from. One is the notion that we should follow our passion. You hear it all the time, follow your passion. And there's nothing wrong with following your passion. In fact, that is a good part of finding a life and life paths that you want to go down. The challenge is you usually hear it as your passion. And studies have shown that only 20% of people have a really clearly defined passion. Most people are much squishier. They've got 7 or 8 different things that they're really passionate about or interested in, or they don't have that kind of clarity. So saying your passion, implying a singular passion, gets a lot of us stuck because we're trying to find that one right, perfect, singular thing. And most of us don't have that one right, singular thing. We have, on average, 7 or 8 things that we can be equally passionate about, or that we might want to be engaged in all of. So one dysfunctional challenge is believing that you've got to find your passion. Another dysfunctional belief, which I'm betting is familiar to you, I bet a lot of you can identify with this, is you constantly hear from folks, well, you ought to know where you're going by now. Haven't you made up your mind about where you want to go to college? Haven't you made up your mind about what you want to do professionally? And of course, that's not the way life works either, right? We are where we are. Where we are is successful. We're good, valuable human beings, and we're constantly evolving and growing. So we might have stepped into something that we're enjoying now. We might want to go down 12 different paths over the next 5 years. There, again, is no singular path, and we're not behind. We are where we are. It's fantastic. And wherever we are is a path forward to being able to go down the path that we would like to pursue. So this perception that we're late, that we've missed out, that we're somehow dysfunctional in figuring out where we want to go in our life gets in our way as well. We get trapped in the search for perfection loop. Similarly, we hear you need to be the best possible version of yourself. You need your best self, right? But there isn't one best. There are lots of attainable bests, and sometimes we are set off on a path to attain an unattainable best, something that gets in the way of a perfectly good version of our life that we would really enjoy. So design thinking and designing your life helps you get out of those stuck points. And if you pick up the book and check it out, you dive more deeply into the processes, which I encourage you all to do. You'll see that there are many steps and tools and so forth that Burnett and Evans share that are foundational to design thinking. We've only got about 30 minutes this morning, so I am going to share 5 of them that in class I have found are really useful to students, tend to resonate, carry them forward and apply them when they're thinking about their lives and their careers. And Burnett and Evans have found the same thing. So we only have time to talk about 5 principles this morning, but I hope that you find them interesting, and I hope you find them valuable. So the first principle that we're going to talk about of the 5, and I'll give you all 5 real quickly before we start to go through them. The 5 principles that we have time to go through this morning are connecting the dots, for creating a connected work view and a life view. More on that in a bit. Avoiding gravity problems is the second. The third is creating 3 5-year Odyssey plans, getting into a practice of regularly having 3 totally different paths that you think you might want your life to go down. Then 4, prototyping your life. 4, and then 5, learning to choose well. And we're applying these principles to our lives, but these are also tools and techniques that get applied all the time to designing a new product, to designing a new service, to creating something in a way that has nothing to do with your life. So we're using the methodology to talk about our life, but broadly applicable. So the first thing to do, if you're thinking about designing your life, which you would do in a product or service as well, is to figure out how do you connect the dots. So positive psychologists have done a lot of research over the last couple of decades, and they've discovered that in terms of feeling a sense of happiness and contentment, feeling meaning and purpose and joy in our lives, there are three things that we have to have aligned. We have to have aligned who we are, what we believe, and what we do in the world. And when you can create connections between those three things, when you can create a coherent story for yourself that represents the path and alignment that you want to go down with who you are, what you believe, and what you want to do in the world, then you're going to experience your life as meaningful, as rewarding, and as joyful. So how do you do that? Well, really tactically, Burnett and Davis talk about doing two things. First, reflecting on your work view. And your work view is, what work do you do? What's it about? What's the purpose of the work? What does it entail? And this may be something that you want to apply now while you're in school, to be thinking about role as a student and the way you're living life now. It might be something you want to think about aspirational. The career trajectory I'm thinking about is this, and this is what the work entails. And you write that down, try to distill it down to 250 words. The kind of work that you want to do or that you're doing, what's it all about, what's the purpose behind it, those sorts of things. And then your life view. And this is deeply personal for everybody. For some of us, it has a spirituality to it. For others, it has a naturalistic dimension to it. But from your point of view, what's the purpose of life? Why are you here? What difference do you want to make in the world? Reflect on those, again, just in 250 words, and then look at it, think about it, and figure out what are the connections. How can you connect your life view and your work view together in coherent ways so that you can start to experience your life as meaningful? How can you make those connections? So that's the first thing that design thinking tells us can be really useful in figuring out how to live our lives in a multitude of ways that we will find meaningful and joyful. The second concept that Burnett and Evans share out of design thinking is avoiding getting stuck by gravity problems. And I love this concept. Ever since I first heard it, I thought that the notion of gravity problems is incredibly powerful. And when we can have the discipline that design thinking suggests, it can really help us lead much more satisfying lives, much less frustrating lives. So what's a gravity problem? So a gravity problem are those problems upon which you can't take any action. And they're problems that just exist. There's nothing you can do about it, and yet somehow we get mired in them all the time. We keep bumping our head into gravity problems, thinking that somehow we can change them. It reminds me of the Chinese proverb, having the wisdom to change the things you can and knowing the things that you can't change, right? Similar sort of thing. So Evans and Burnett share a story to illustrate what a gravity problem is about. And Bob says, so I've got this big problem and I don't know what to do about it. And then, oh wow, Jane, what's the problem? It's gravity. Gravity? Yeah, it's making me crazy. Every day I feel heavier. I can't get my bike up the hill easily. It never leaves me. I don't know what to do about it. Can you help me? Right? Can you change gravity? And of course, you can't change gravity. Gravity just exists. There are plenty of situations and problems in our life upon which we cannot take any action to actually change it. Burnett and Evans talk about a gentleman being ambitious in a company that's family owned, and he wants to be a CEO. It's a life destination, but he doesn't have the right last name, right? Family owned. He's not a Smith. He's never going to be able to be the owner of that business, but he constantly is racking his brain about what he can do to possibly be the CEO of that company. He's never going to be. He's not a Smith, right? It's a gravity problem. So when you're confronted by a gravity problem, to get unstuck, there are two and only two things that you can do about it. You can either accept it and move on. The gentleman in the firm can either say, okay, to be a CEO, I've got to leave. I accept I can never be the CEO of this firm, and I want to be a CEO, so I accept that reality, and I'm moving on to a place where I can find my happiness. You can accept it, or you can reframe it. You can decide that you can fulfill all of your goals, that it's not about being CEO. It's actually about being able to contribute in meaningful ways and to make a difference, to be recognized, valued, whatever. Whatever the applicable situation, if you can reframe it and find a different way to be satisfied in that context, that's fine. You've now taken away the gravity problem, and you can live in that moment and be fine. If you can't, your only other choice is to accept it and move on. We all waste too many hours, too many days, too much of our life worrying over and trying to solve what are essentially gravity problems. So the second problem, first connect the dots, then avoid getting stuck by gravity problems, and then thirdly, ideate. Principle of design thinking is curiosity. Have as many possibilities as you possibly can to imagine what a new product or a service could look like. In this case, come up with as many ideas that could be a meaningful and joyful for life for you as possible, and define them. And Burnett and Evans suggest three very intentionally. So they've done a bunch of research at the Stanford D School and discovered that when you start out with three possible solutions in a creativity brainstorming exercise or a creativity ideation exercise, and you jump off from there, you get significantly more, something like 300 to 600 times more ultimate ideas than you do if you just start with one. There's something magical about starting with three possibilities and the human brain that fires up our creativity and helps us be more creative. When we start with just one solution and try to brainstorm from there, we can be effective, but we don't come up with nearly as many solutions. So ideate and come up with three possible Odyssey plans for defining a happy life. So what does that look like? So plan one is think about your current situation or your aspirational career, your aspirational life, where you want to go, kind of what you already have in mind, and make it a little better. Put your bucket list items in there, map that out. In the slide deck, there's a template for doing that that allows you to kind of see it, to evaluate it, compare it to other options. Plan one looks like that. Plan two looks like, all right, AI, artificial intelligence, and robots have taken over the world. There is that job no longer exists. That life path is no longer possible. Sorry, you have to pick something else. So if artificial intelligence and robots or climate change, whatever, took away the possible life that you are currently aspiring towards, what would you do? What does that path look like? And you'll see that the three maps that I shared you as examples. Be a corporate attorney is the current life path that person is on, studying to be a corporate attorney. AI and robots wipe out the legal field. Person decides, okay, I'm going to be a museum curator in New York City. Very cool. The third option is where you really get a lot of options, a lot of ideas. And this is the wild card thought. So if you didn't have to worry about money ever, and you didn't care what people thought, right? Whatever you pick, maybe you want to be a butterfly rancher in New Mexico, but you don't want people saying butterfly rancher. Why in the world would you want to be a butterfly rancher? Then put that idea down. What's that look like? For this person, it's being a creative starving artist. They don't care about money. They don't need the money for whatever reason. They don't need the acceptance of others. They're just going to go down that path and map that out. And then when you've got those three options, you can see all of the possibilities before you for stepping into your lives. And you don't have to come up with just one path at this stage. You are going to broaden it out, and then eventually you're going to narrow it and pare it down, and you're going to go to the next stage, which is about going the wrong way. Sorry about that, guys. So prototyping your life. So in the design thinking process, once you have ideated, then you build some examples to test it out. You've diversified your possibilities. Now you've narrowed it down on some things that you think could work. If it's a product or a service, or if you're designing your life, you've come up with a path that you think could be really rewarding. Well, how do you prototype your life? You want to ask interesting questions. You want to explore assumptions. You want to involve others with your ideas. It's that radical collaboration we talked about at the beginning. And you need to sneak up on the future, right? Because you can't go out necessarily and model immediately being a neurosurgeon, because it would take you 10 years of study and work to get there and so forth. But you can sneak up on it and find ways to get a sense of whether it would be rewarding or not. So when you are designing your life via prototype, there are two things that you can do. And there are many more in the book and so forth. This morning I'm keeping it tight, so I'm going to share just two. One is a prototype conversation, and two is a prototype experience. And I highly recommend prototype conversations as a way to figure out what you want to do. Not only in this case, we're talking about prototyping things and so forth, but as you are trying to figure out career paths you want to go down, a prototype conversation is a really valuable tool. And what a prototype conversation is identifying somebody who's living the life that you think could be really cool now and going out and talking to them. Say, hey, can I buy you coffee at Starbucks? Could we sit down for half an hour? I think that I might want to be a corporate attorney in New York City, and I would like to talk to you, since you're a corporate attorney in New York City, and find out what your life is like. What do you do on a daily basis? What's rewarding? What's frustrating? How did you get into it? And you get the opportunity to live your life through hearing them talk about the life that they're living, and find out, does that resonate? Does it have narrative resonance with you? When we talk about and we express ideas, we will have some sort of an emotional response to that. And I want to say a little bit about that. One of the principles of design thinking is that how you feel about something is just as important as how you logically think about it. And because the part of our brain that is responsible for emotion is not directly connected to the part of our brain that is responsible for rational thought and logic, we cannot express the feelings that we have in words very often, and we can't connect them directly many times to our logic. And yet they're just as important to our sense of meaning and to our sense of purpose and to our joy, and they're just as legitimate. So we have to be very mindful of and attuned to our emotions. We used to disregard it, right? Don't just go by your gut. Think through it logically, etc. And we now know that actually our gut is an entirely different set of regions in the brain that have their own way of processing that are just as important to our physical well-being, our mental well-being, and our long-term joy. So we've got to think about those things. A prototyping conversation is a great way to see how we feel about an opportunity and to understand it in a logical, rational way, and to be able to connect that through. A second possibility is to develop a prototype experience. Perhaps you can break down a part of what you want to do. Break it down into enough little small things that you can go out and do it. You can go out and shadow that corporate attorney for a day and see if they'll let you do 2 or 3 of the tasks that you can do without legal consequence, or a physician, or whatever it is you want to do. Find a way to break down into small things that you can actually go out and experiment with and try to get a sense of if that is in fact rewarding for you, if it puts you on the right path, if it puts you on a path that you would find rewarding and joyful. And remember, when in this context, from the design thinking framework, we talk about right path. It's not a single path, and you can change the path at any time because you're always iterating and developing your life. So the final principle that I want to share with you this morning, the fifth principle for design thinking, is learning how to choose well. And there's this interesting dysfunctional belief that we have to make the right choice. But there isn't necessarily a right choice. There's only a right process for choosing that helps us to make choices that work, that are effective. It's a product or service that work or effective, that have meaning and are joyful if we're choosing for our life. So what's that process look like? It's a 5-step process in the context of design thinking. First, you gather and you create. You become aware. You think about all of the options that are out there. And then you narrow things down to 3 to 5 options. And the 3 to 5 is really important. A lot of research now shows that we are only able to handle 6 or 7 choices and to work with them effectively, both in terms of how we feel about them and how we think about them logically. There's this great study that was done in New York City at one of the research institutions out there around jam. And they set up a stand in a grocery store selling jam, and they started out with 6 different flavors of jam. And people came in, they were asked to try all of them and then decide which one they liked the best and if they would purchase it or not. And with 6 samples, people could pick which one they enjoyed the most fairly often, and 20% of people bought jam. When they expanded it out to 24 options, right, because there's a jam for everybody, you would think, when they sifted it out to 24 different types of jam, people couldn't pick which one they liked. They got really frustrated. They got agitated. They became dissatisfied with the process. And only 3% wound up buying a jar of jam, right? So we find that 6 or 7 options, narrowing down to 6 or 7 or 3 to 5, is a really important part of making choices well. You've got to be able to do that. Come up with whatever scoring mechanism process fits for you for doing that. But gather as many choices as you can, think through them, narrow them down to 3 to 5, choose. Make a choice. You're going to go out, you're going to prototype, you're going to test when you do that, because we're in the design thinking methodology. But choice is really important. Another famous study has shown that when it comes to our satisfaction, our happiness, and well-being, we are most happy when we fully commit to something and see it as non-reversible. There's a famous study that was done taking advertisements out in a newspaper where folks were given infinite choice and they could undo their choice versus being told they had to stick with their first choice. And after a period of time, it was found that the people who could not reverse their choice, who had to live with the choice that they had made and just move on with it, had a 60 to 70% rate of satisfaction with the choice they'd made and were much happier in the long term. So making a choice and then just going forward, boom, accept it, is an important part of making choices well. And then let go. Forget the rest of the choices, move forward, step into it, embrace it. That's the process for making choices well. No perfect choice, no perfect path, of course, but we gather a lot of options and create possibilities, possible paths for our life, possible products or service models in a different way. Narrow it down to 3 to 5 that are workable. Choose, let go, accept your choice. You will be happier, you will be more content, the solution will be more effective. So, to come back and recap, back to the beginning. Design thinking is about applying the principles of reframing and curiosity, being mindful of process, applying radical collaboration and a bias towards action, all things that we've been talking about. And then very specific tactics that we use up under those general principles are connecting the dots, avoiding gravity problems, creating three options or 3 alternatives when applying the principles to our life, prototype, whether it's your life or something else. Learn to choose well and apply the process of making good choices. And then remember that living your life well, creating new products or services, applying design thinking is about having fun, enjoying the process, enjoying the ride, and that you can do this. It is not rocket science. When you break it down and you make it simple, it's about being curious, talking to people, and trying stuff. That is design thinking in a nutshell. So I am going to wrap there with about 5 minutes for questions. And let's see if anybody has questions. I'm going to try to get the Google Doc up so that I can see those from the moderator.
Hi, Dennis.
Hi.
If you would like me to, I can just read them off if you would like me to.
That would be great. Yeah, that's probably faster. It'll save me one of the Yep. So what questions do you have?
Okay, so Kat asked a couple minutes ago, in the prototyping section, what are ways you can involve others?
Yeah, absolutely. So involving others is a really valuable part of the prototyping process. And you can either do it on the design or on the feedback stage, in a lot of ways, ideally on both, right? So you can build a prototype in collaboration with others. If you're designing your life, that may not be literally having somebody help build your life, but having a group, a board of advisors, some close friends who will give you candid feedback, who will help you think out loud about the choices that relate to your life. If you are developing a product or a service, developing and applying design thinking there, then absolutely working in a team to have the benefit of lots of different ideas and perspectives. And the research shows the more diverse in every dimension the team is to bring a lot of possibilities into the process, the better off you are. Mind you, diversity has to converge. So you want as many options as possible in the beginning, but you've got to get that down to 3 to 5 workable options that you can choose from. And that's where on the backside, having a group can be really helpful as well, because you can build your prototype. If it's a product or service, it doesn't have to actually work. It just has to model what working is like. If it's your life, you can talk through what it would be like and get the feedback from yourself and from others. But using that group to get input back as part of the narrowing process, and then validation of the narrowing process, is really valuable. So collaboration is absolutely one. Collaboration and input and iterating ideas driven by input from others is absolutely a fundamental principle of design thinking.
Awesome. 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 Okay. So Jacqueline asked, how does coming up with a crazy plan that you would do if you didn't need money or care about what others think actually help you design your life?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. So the reason that is so valuable is because our brains are hardwired to protect us. And so before we can think outside of what's comfortable for us, before we can think about what we're really capable of, et cetera, we have to come up with tricks to let our mind free. Because otherwise, if you're running a marathon, I'll use as an example, the brain will hold you at a pace that is like 30 to 40% below the pace you can actually run for that entire time. The same is true in every dimension of our life, right? Our brains are hardwired to keep us safe. So our brains, unless we trick them, won't let us put things into the consideration set that we think are risky, that might not work out. So the benefit of doing that as an exercise is we wind up putting a lot of things on the table that we would just naturally screen out and never consider. So you may not go down that crazy path itself in entirety, but there might be 3 or 4 things that come out in thinking about that crazy path that really do fit, and you're willing to embrace and you want to fold into your path, that wind up being really valuable. So it's about being able to identify those things your brain would automatically screen out for you and be able to consider them.
Fantastic. So Megan had a great question. She asked, do you have a personal experience to corroborate this concept, perhaps the most impactful one?
So which concept? Just design thinking overall?
Design thinking overall.
Yeah, so in terms of designing your life, absolutely. I would say the personal experience for me is I teach design thinking for our program, which is a technology leadership, one of our programs, which is technology leadership. And I have seen many of our students who are 25 to 35, but particularly in that age group, who came into the program trying to figure out what they wanted to do and were stuck in all of the ways that I talked about, and found the process really valuable and were able to use it to go out and go down paths that they found really rewarding, and they were stuck. I mean, so the ability to get unstuck, I've seen many times that it's really helpful. We hold ourselves back, trying to find the best, trying to find the perfect, getting stuck by gravity problems, not knowing how to ideate multiple possibilities. I think really practical tools, and when you apply them, they give you lots of ways to what we call reframing. See things differently, shift it differently until it makes sense and it locks in for you. So absolutely.
Awesome. So Dennis, I have a couple more questions.
Yep.
So students, if I do not get to your questions, I do apologize. We just have to be done at the 11:05 mark. So just so you know. So Dennis, Megan asked, Natalie asked, how would you go about meeting more people in the area of work you want to involve yourself in?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the first thing I would say is think about the folks you know, and ask around if they know anybody, and ask them for an introduction. I have found consistently over the time that anytime you reach out to a person, whether you know them or not, and say, hey, I am interested in what you do, and I would like to learn from you, from your experience, people will talk to you. They really enjoy being helpful. They want to pay it forward. So the other thing I would recommend is LinkedIn, especially as you start to advance in your career in college and so forth. Use LinkedIn to build relationships, to identify relationships, and don't be sheepish. A lot of the time in our head, we hear this false narrative that we're going to be bothering somebody or imposing upon them, disturbing them. And the reality is that's not true. We're giving them the gift. People want to help others, and that's part of how we all as human beings create meaning. So when you ask for somebody to help you by sharing what they do, that's like a perfect gift for them. So step into that and embrace just asking.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. It looks like we are out of time. Dr. Dennis, thank you so much. All students, make sure that you guys are moving on to the next session of your choice. And then give a quick shout out and a quick thank you in the chat if you enjoyed this session. Again, thank you, Dr. Trinkle. It means a lot. We're very happy to have you today.
My pleasure. Thanks. Thanks, everybody.
Awesome. So thank you, guys.